How's it going, YouTube? Coming today with another video, and today, guys, what the bring to you is where to Handtrap. Now, this video is always going to be one of my favorite ones to put out because there's just so many different decks in the game that you really have to keep track of, especially right now, though. There's like 15 different decks that are viable at the moment, and that's pretty crazy, especially when you want to know which ones to Handtrap, what Handtraps you should be playing, just to make sure that you can keep up with all these different matchups, and are there any concessions that you have to make with Handtraps, so you might have to not be as prepared for certain matchups as you'd like, because there are so many decks available. And we'll talk about a lot of that today, and a lot of the combination decks that we're seeing being like the Runick Spright deck, we're seeing Mathmech Ignister. So a lot of these are really interesting matchups, and I really want to talk about those too. If you haven't already checked out my sponsors over at Imperium Duelist and Dragon Shield, definitely go ahead and check them out down in the description below. I haven't really been feeling that well for the last like 6 days, so if I sound a little off today, I'm sorry about that. But we're on the upswing, we're feeling a little bit better, so here I am making this video, and I hope that you enjoy it. So without further ado, top right on into the first deck that I want to talk about here, being the Mathmech Ignister. This is actually really interesting because the two decks work really well in conjunction with each other, but you really do see the Ignister in the deck really shine, especially when they're starting off in combo. You can definitely still start with things like a circular and go crazy with Mathmech cards, but a lot of times from what I've seen in this matchup, you usually see the Ignister cards start off, and I always feel like in this matchup it's still just correct to negate the infant, because getting that field spell is just such free extension that the deck just really doesn't need. So at that point too, if they start off with the Mathmech cards, shutting off the Alimbertion is also just really nice, so they don't get to like the diameter or the super factorial. So many different things that you can get to off this card that are just really strong. Also, the fact that you can just bring back a monster for free is pretty crazy as well. So I definitely recommend going ahead and just stopping the Alimbertion if that's what they start with. But if they do start with the infant, go ahead and just stop that with Ash, Imperm, Veiler, whatever you have, because I feel like this is just overall the best one to go ahead and stop. And then again, if you are playing against this matchup, just go ahead and save that Bell for super factorial, or if you have Crow, just save it for when they do flip super factorial on your turn. Then you can go ahead and just Crow the diameter, and you don't really have to worry about the Omni negation or the Laplation hitting the board, which is really nice. It's a really nice play around of tactics as well, so you don't use it on your opponent's turn for no reason. So there's always a few ways you can go ahead and stop this deck. I feel like it's a little bit more inconsistent being together versus just separate, because the engines work really well on their own, but seeing the crossover is nice, and so you'll probably see this a little bit more. The next deck here is going to be Runick Spright. This deck is really interesting. I feel like you should still stop it on all the Spright interactions, but if you want to go ahead and stop any of the Runick cards, you can go ahead and Ash tip, but I would rather you just Ghost Ogre things like Fountain as well. They will have things like Toad protecting those cards, which is pretty crazy, but you want to make sure that you have some kind of out for it. Make sure that you're setting in your Lightning Storms, your Dusters, your evenly matches. Evenly match against tier right now, by the way, absolutely top tier. Would 100% recommend going ahead and getting yourself some evenly matches if you are struggling in the tier matchup, because there's no Omni negation that goes up, so being able to use evenly is pretty insane. But as far as Runick Spright goes, go ahead and Ghost Ogre that field spell. Again, you can Ash tip, but I'd rather even see you Ash things like starters, so you don't have to worry about cards like Red. And then you have DD Crow and the Ronin Tone before they make Elf, so they can't chain Elf. Then you can go ahead and Veiler or Imperm the blue or the jet, whichever one you see first on the special summon, because you got to realize that if blue hits the board, then it's jet plus starter or smashers, and if jet hits the board, then it's usually starter plus blue and then into red or carrot. So both of these cards really prompt you to negate them, just because of the fact that they get them so far in their engine that you really want to go ahead and shut it off as soon as possible. And then, of course, you can always Ghost Ogre on Gigantic Spright as well. Usually using things like Imperm Veiler on the Gigantic isn't real, because most times you'll just see the Elf hit the board first. But if there's no Elf and they immediately go Gigantic, then of course you can just Veiler or Imperm that, because a lot of times it's just when the hands aren't super optimal, they go like Diva, Summon Diva into Gigantic immediately. So you can go ahead and just Ghost Ogre. You can Imperm, you can Veiler, but at the same point, if you see them really starting to go off, make sure that you are shutting off that blue, that jet, so that the engine doesn't really get super out of hand. Moving off of this deck though, talking more about tier. Tier is really interesting right now because there's a lot of different variants going on. I think about 3 or 4 right now. Mostly the danger variant, because I feel like that's just the best one out there right now. It's just a lot of free extension, and then like you never really negate the dangers either, so they just hit the board, which is pretty cool, and I feel like that's always going to be the plus side of dangers, right? And so the other thing too is you want to make sure that you are saving the Ash Blossom for that Hofness, because you want to make sure that if you're trying to combo off, that your opponent's not going to be interrupt or get a lot of advantage. I did this the other day at the tournament too, where I Hofness and milled 2 names and was able to just put up such a board that whatever my opponent put up, it just didn't matter because I had Poly in my hand too for Chimera, and then I also just had already so many monsters on the board that being able to bait everything that my opponent did was just really easy. The other one here though that I want to talk about too is Curious. Now, you can Imperm or Valor on the kit close, that's never going to be wrong, but if you do notice that they're on heavier dangers, then you want to make sure that you are potentially just ashing Imperm Valoring on the Curious. It's a very good card, getting your opponent to whatever they want, realistically, so make sure that you are just saving it for things like Curious, but stopping the kit is still really solid too, so it's really just a matter of if they already have a lot of advantage that you're seeing, and it doesn't really look like negating the kit's going to do a whole lot, then just save it for the Curious, but if it looks like the only play that they can really do at the moment is going for the kit and hoping that they can really get there. Like let's say they normal summon Rhino and then they spun back the Rhino and whatever they sent to make a kit, then you can go ahead and Valor Imperm that. But otherwise, just save it for the Curious. It's pretty strong. Ghost Ogre on IP is also really strong. You'll see a lot of the Topologics right now. The Topologics are very crazy at the moment. And then also just utilizing the Bell and Crow on any of the monsters in the graveyard whenever they're trying to use their effects. But moving off of this here, we have Rikka. Rikka is a deck that I really wanted to cover here because I feel like this is a deck that a lot of people just still don't really know how to play against. It's pretty strong. It's one of those decks right now that can really catch you off guard as a surprise factor. But this is very similar as to how we stopped the Sun Avalon deck as well. If you see the Jasmine come out, just wait till your opponent tributes the monster for cost underneath Jasmine and then hit it with Imperm or Valor. It's pretty strong. I like that a lot too. The other thing though is going to be ashing on Sowing. Sowing's really strong if you have the crossover engine in the deck as well, because it just nets so much advantage that you want to go ahead and cut off the engine completely. So ashing on Sowing is never going to be a bad thing. Utilizing Crow on Petal as well so it can't keep recurring is really strong as well. And then using Ghost Ogre on Con is probably your best bet, because whenever Con hits the board, you want to be able to clear it as soon as possible. This is usually the biggest problem in the deck when you're playing against it. So whenever they attempt to go ahead and set the card from deck, you want to make sure that you have that Ghost Ogre for this, because it's very strong to shut it down. Exosister is a deck that really fell off, and it's something that is still like tier 2, but it's not going to be very strong at the moment. It has a lot of nice utility, but it just really can't go second, and it doesn't really have a great matchup versus a lot of the meta that we're seeing right now. So I think that this is a deck that has potential maybe later on, but as far as right now, I don't know if it's that strong, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to see it. So having things like Imperm or Valor for the XCs here is really strong because of the fact that they get the Banish and then they also get the Search, something that we really want to make sure gets stopped. Then you have Ghost Ogre for any of the names that are on board that try to activate to summon an Exceed, which is also really good because you have to use that specific card. You can also use Bell and Returnia too, which is really nice. I like this a lot. I think this is something that you should be holding Bell for. I know that Bell isn't like the most common card at the moment, but it's still very strong, and I think this is something that's very underrated. The other thing though is going to be Ash Blossom on Vadis. Ashing Vadis is really important. You should be holding your Ash as long as possible for Vadis. Even if you see the Malfa hit the board, unless it's a simplified game state and they only have Malfa, then you can go ahead and Ash that instead. But Vadis is a card that a lot of people end up playing into, and this is something where if you have the Ash, then you don't even have to worry about it. But this is something that's very strong, and it can just be chainable to anything that you do with your graveyard. So just make sure that you do have a plan for this and that you have some way to out it. The next deck that I have for you is going to be Dino. The reason I'm covering Dino is because there was a lot of people at the last regional that had a really tough time against this deck, and it was actually doing fairly well. And I've been hearing about this a lot, so I want to make sure that we're still really keen on how to stop this deck. So you're either going to Ghost Ogre the Field Spell, because the Field Spell is really cracked, so you want to make sure that you have the Ghost Ogre for that. You want to make sure that you are crowing the Miscellaneous Source the second it goes to grave, or you're ashing it when it banishes. And then also, you want to Imperm or Valor the Machu Mech or the Bish Balkan. Both of these cards lead to the FTK, which is a bigger issue, and you want to make sure that you have the out for that. Neither of them are dinosaurs, so you can go ahead and stop them, even if they are under a Miscellaneous Source, which is really nice. I'm a big fan of that. Go ahead and stop these cards. They're really broken. So as for the next one here, we have Marincess. This is a deck that I wanted to cover again because I feel like this is something that a lot of people just kind of forgot about, but it does pop up a lot still, and I think this deck is actually a really big sleeper for the format too. So you can Ghost Ogre the Field Spell, but like here's the thing too, the Field Spell isn't as important as it used to be because Crystal Heart isn't really played. So now it's really just focused more on the monster. So if you clear the monster, a lot of times you're leaving out the Battle Ocean, which allows your opponent, since you can recur almost every card in the deck, that you can dive on the next turn and summon from deck, so which is pretty crazy. So it is really important that you do out the Field Spell when you out the monster too. because outing the field spell puts your opponent on such a awkward position unless they already have the Piscalis on the graveyard, because that one's really important to recur the field spell, but it only is the turn after it's sent to grave as well. So you got to look at all those options. If you have Crow, sometimes it's better just to Crow out the Pescal if you do out the Battle Ocean, unless you just Cosmic it, because at that point you're putting your opponent really far behind and they don't have access to Ocean. The other thing is you want to make sure that you're ashing, Veiler, Imperm, everything on Sea Angel. Sea Angel is really strong to go ahead and get you into your Battle Ocean or your Dive, both are very strong cards, and you want to make sure that you are stopping that as soon as possible, because this is just the avenue to make sure that you have access to so many different ways to play. The last thing here is utilizing Crow on the Splash Mage target or the Anemone target or Bell. I think that it's really important too, if you have the Crow, to just use it when you use Anemone to target Splash Mage, because at that point you're just really cutting off that angle to be able to go straight into a Link 4. So you want to make sure that at that point you're just making them go Anemone, target Splash Mage, you banish Splash Mage, and then you better have 2 extenders to at least get into your Link 4, because if you don't, then you're just passing on Anemone, and it's like not even the best option. So this is something that I definitely recommend here. A lot of people don't use the Battle Ocean on Anemone because they feel like they're just going to get rid of it immediately anyway. So this is something that can really punish the plays where people just don't use all the cards on the board because they think that they're just going to get the free summon here. I hope that you enjoyed this video today. I know that it was a bit shorter, but I want to make sure that we covered a lot of those decks that have been relatively forgotten about and that can still be a really big dark horse this weekend. I hope that if you enjoyed this video today, you'll check out my Discord, Twitch, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are down in the description below. And if you want a coaching session over at Metafy, definitely feel free to PM me on Discord if you have any questions, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you all so much.